What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Falcons Final Whistle podcast presented by Zaxby's. I'm Scott Bear alongside Terrin and Tori McElhaney, and we're coming to you from Mercedes-Benz Stadium after an unwelcome result for the Atlanta Falcons. They lose 24-16 to the Washington Commanders in what I'm very comfortable saying was a winnable game despite having several miscues. They had opportunities late, ultimately could not cash in, could not complete another fourth quarter comeback, and they fall to 3-3 on the year. And we're going to go into a number of different things, especially that fourth quarter. I'm sure you all want to hear about our opinions and about what Arthur Smith said about so many different, not controversial, but pivotal moments, I would say. We're going to talk about the run game and the need to win the turnover battle, which they have not been doing lately. And we're going to end this thing on a positive note because Calais Campbell did record his 100th sack here, sacking Sam Howell. So, and we will get to all that stuff. But let's start with big picture, right? How do we, does anyone agree or disagree with the fact that I said this was a very winnable game that was ultimately an opportunity missed?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that everyone in that locker room would say the same thing. I think a lot of those coaches would say the same thing, that this is a game that the Falcons, I think on paper and even here watching this game unfold, it was a game they should have won, that they had every opportunity to go down and win. And I think it's, again, something that we've talked about ad nauseum from the get-go of this season, is that, like, this defense is doing enough. Granted, this first quarter wasn't a really good showing for this defense, but you got to give credit where credit is due, that the fact that Washington had the field position that they did, they had a really great punt return that really set them up. But take that aside and go to the third and the fourth quarter to what this defense was able to do. They were able to give the ball back to this offense to score multiple times. This is not something that you haven't heard me or anyone in that locker room say before, that there is just opportunities being missed for the Falcons. But today, more than any other day, I feel like there was an issue that popped up that we actually haven't seen from this team this year, and it had to do with what I know we're going to talk about, which is just the procedural issues that you saw this team have in the fourth quarter.
As much as every bone in my body wants to be the one person who will disagree with you, even in this one, I can't. Like, it just goes against my
contrarian.
Yeah, I like to be the
style.
one that's like, ooh, maybe not. But for this one, no, that was definitely a winnable game, especially with a fourth quarter comeback, which they've loved all season.
And Terrin says that because she has to write the game story that is published at the buzzer or at the very, very end of the game.
Which is a stressful endeavor under normal circumstances, let alone when it comes down to the final play.
I swear, I think I've written 2 stories every game. At least, like, the intro. I've written at least 2 for every single game. Except for London, because I was not there.
And it
not
was
bitter.
And it was another one of those situations where they just ultimately couldn't pull it out. And nobody wins the stat battle and automatically wins the game, but they outgained Washington 402-93. They only allowed 2 third down conversions all day. Washington gained less than 4 yards per play. The Falcons sacked Sam Howell 5 times, and they lost.
Yeah, if you're looking at everything else but the score,
right,
and like how many touchdowns were scored.
Sure.
If you cover those 2 points of the stat sheet up, this looks like the Falcons ran away with this game just from the total production. Okay, I take it back. Cover up the interceptions too.
Right, and that was
the key things here.
Yeah, and that was a major factor. Every interception, I hope I'm getting this right, came in the second half.
Yes.
And 2 came in the fourth quarter. One
was in the end zone.
Another one eliminated a last-ditch comeback attempt where they were all the way down to the Washington 34-yard line. And there were a lot of pivotal moments in that fourth quarter where the defense gets you 4 consecutive punts. And there were some issues that, Tori, that you wrote about, you addressed in your story that I encourage everybody to go read about the fourth quarter. So floor is yours in terms of these pivotal moments, which you can kind of tick off 1, 2, 3, I guess.
Right, yeah. So I'll just go, first off, I'll reiterate what Scott said, where I definitely recommend you going back and actually reading what I wrote post game about these 3 very specific critical moments where game management was a problem for the Falcons in the fourth quarter. And I say that because me just talking and talking is not, I think, going to accurately describe the situation. And I don't think I would be doing the coaches or the players justice with reiterating what they said. So I go back and read what Arthur Smith exactly said about these situations. So I'm going to preface it by saying that. But the first situation that I really was, I'll just be honest, was confused about. And I know what analytics say. I understand the argument. But it's when the Falcons went for 2. And they were down by 14. And as the third quarter bled into the fourth quarter, they moved the ball down to the Washington 2-yard line. Desmond Ridder hits Jonnu Smith for a touchdown. Now the score is at 24-16 with 12 minutes and 38 seconds left on the clock. The Falcons decide to go for 2. And 2 plays later, because they ended up having a penalty on the first try, it's a failed 2-point conversion attempt.
Both times.
Yeah. So now you are looking at a 24-16 deficit with 12 minutes to go in this game. So it's still a lot of time, but I think the question is why do you go for 2 there? And so, of course, Arthur Smith was asked, why did you want to go for 2 there? And he said, this is what he said. He said, we did it last year at Los Angeles. We were down 14. You're in the fourth quarter. And those are the consequences you live with. We did it in LA, and we even got it to 6. We did it in Tampa last year, right? Down there, down 14 late. You have 2 shots at it. You get it. It's a 6-point game. We've done it before. They get the penalty. We got them to the 1. Then they stopped us. We did it last year twice. That's what he said. My argument to that is that those 2 situations against Los Angeles and Tampa were 2 very different situations in my mind. Both of those 2-point conversions from both of those games came with about, I think it was less than 5 minutes to go in both of those games.
I think that makes a major difference right there.
From a personal standpoint, I can only talk personally, that makes a difference. And how much time is on the clock. So that's the first situation. Second situation is...
I'm sorry, can I comment on that
Please
one?
go.
Just
Please, yeah.
real quick. I think there's another layer of context that kind of needs to be added. Like, I understand the logic of what he's talking about. Like, it makes sense to me, and I get where the line of thinking is. Another factor, in my opinion, in addition to the time left on the clock, is where you are, right? If I'm correct, obviously the game against the Rams was on the road, and the game against Tampa was on the road, right? Mm-hmm. This is a home environment where the crowd is really starting to get into it. Not only do you have the time, but if you go to overtime, it's no longer just pure sudden death. Your defense is playing pretty well in terms of preventing Washington from scoring with a full field, right? And even if you go to overtime, you have a lot of things on your side, which means just get the 14 as opposed to, I get what he's trying to say is that he can go out and win it as opposed to playing to try to tie it. And if he needs 2 touchdowns, you have 2 shots to get a 2-point conversion, you're probably going to hit 1. All of it makes sense. Yeah. I'm just saying that within the context, I think it's at least fair to debate it.
Yeah.
I think I just wanted to get my 2 cents in right there.
No, I'm glad that you did too. Because it's really hard to kind of talk through these things. And that's why, again, I was like, please go read it, because I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job in explaining what happened and why it mattered and why there was a question as to why you go for it or you don't go for it.
Right. And one more point of emphasis. We are not being critical of the decision. We are putting the decision in full context, both in what Arthur Smith said and within the situation and structure of this game as compared to times that they've done it. All right, soapbox.
Yeah.
Disclaimer over.
Right. Yeah. So are we ready to move on to situation number 2? Situation number 2 was Desmond Ridder's end zone interception. So after the failed 2-point conversion, the Falcons get the ball back actually fairly quickly because the defense comes up with a 3-and-out. So plenty of time on the clock. You're not worried about that. The offense drives down, and they actually, again, they have a 2nd-and-goal situation from the 2-yard line. Well, the 2nd down play comes up incomplete. Your 3rd-and-goal from the 2-yard line. Then there's a delay of game penalty that pushes the Falcons back to the Washington 7. And delay of game penalties are not necessarily something that this team has been known to do, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, since Arthur Smith has taken over as the head coach here. Delay of game and like procedural penalties and stuff. He always says like, I'll take a holding call because you're in the heat of the moment and you know, it is what it is. But the delay of games, the procedural stuff, the illegal shifts, like those type of things are things that you can control as an offense, and you're just shooting yourself in the foot, essentially. So he's always said that he has an issue with those penalties. Well, this is an exact situation as to why you have an issue with those penalties, because now, instead of 3rd and goal from the 2, you're 3rd and goal from the 7, which is 2 very different plays. It's a very different ideology as to how do you get in the end zone. And with the 3rd down play, they're actually on the verge of potentially having another delay of game again because they're not getting the snap off. And you see it go down 15, 10, 5. I believe it was snapped like right at 1 second.
I think we were both like
someone snap the ball, please. and it was a situation that as soon as the ball was snapped, you saw a discombobulated offense. I think that is fair to say that it was a moment where this offense was not, I think, on the same page. And that was evident in the fact that Desmond Ridder and Arthur Smith said that there was a miscommunication between Desmond Ridder and Drake London on the route that he was running on that 3rd down play that ended up, the ball ended up getting intercepted in the end zone. So that was something that they talked about post game. It's like Arthur Smith is like, you know, there's a lot going on, right? We had a penalty and then the clock stops and then there's almost a delay of game. And he was like, but then the 3rd down play, the play extension, we had a little bit of miscommunication, and it's on us. We have to be better. We have to get it fixed. He said Desmond Ridder was not panicking in that moment, that it really boiled down to the miscommunication that they had. And that's what he said happened in that moment.
So I stayed in the locker room the whole time, and a lot of players were questioned, like, what was going on procedurally? Like, why weren't y'all in sync? This isn't normal for this offense, like Tori said. And a lot of them didn't have an answer, which is curious. It was just, I don't know.
Right.
Like, we got to do a better job. We weren't communicating well. Like, there wasn't one thing that they could pinpoint that was an issue, but even they knew that things weren't clicking.
Right. And it goes back to, like, the 3rd situation is in that final drive that the Falcons had to burn their final timeout after Desmond Ridder clocks the ball or spikes the ball to clock it. And realistically, in those situations, like, you're stopping the clock. You don't need to burn your timeout. But they, again, could not get set, could not get the play off. And so they were about to go into another delay of game penalty if Arthur Smith doesn't call a timeout with about 31 seconds remaining in the game. That's tough, too. And, again, he's talked about this miscommunication in the huddle and that it was a slow start to the it slowed down Desmond Ridder getting to everybody to the line of scrimmage. And he said the exact same thing, and Terrin, I think you make a good point where it's like, was it like, what was the issue with these procedural stuff? This is not something that this team does. And Arthur Smith said that it was a snowball effect, and he said, you know, I can make excuses, and these things sound like excuses, but that's what happened. He said, we've got to be better. It's always going to start with me. It hasn't been an issue, but it was on Sunday. You have to acknowledge that, and you kind of hope that the Falcons can figure out, going back and watching it and having conversations with each other, what were the issues procedurally? Because in the 4th quarter, those procedural moments were huge swings for this team in this loss.
And it's week 6. It's at home.
Yeah.
You're not having an opposing crowd trying to silence you where you can't hear. You are at home and have been playing together for multiple games now. These are not issues. These are issues that you maybe would see in an opener, not this far along.
Right.
That's why it was kind of so odd, because again, this team is normally so sound in those regards, and it did prove costly. This was ultimately a 1-score game with a bunch of opportunities that didn't pan out. And as you look at it, we're also seeing a trend here, right? That since the Detroit Lions game, and now the Lions defense is, I was very impressed. And not every team is that talented, but it's become clear that teams are going to sell out and devote personnel to stopping the run. Now, the Falcons had more than 100 yards rushing today. It was less than 4 yards per carry, which is unusual for them. So they're basically saying, hey, beat us with the pass game.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening to this point. I don't want to say the run game was awful. It just wasn't as dramatically dominant as we've seen in the past.
Well, I think and this is something, I know Terrin wrote about it post game, and she'll have a lot to add to it. But to me, it's been something of a trend for the last few weeks that because I believe against the Texans, they were held to under 100 rushing yards.
I think it was 94.
Yeah. And so this is not something that's new. They've had these moments where the run game where teams
96.
where teams are sitting there saying, you're going to have to beat us through the air. That's essentially, I know we talked a lot about the comments from Jimmy Ward in the Texans locker room before in the week leading up to that game, but that's so true. That's how the league views this team, is like they know what Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson, and Cordero Patterson, when he gets a handoff, can do, because they saw all last year what they could do. In the first couple games, they saw what they could do. So, yeah, they're going to make Desmond Ridder throw the ball. But now it's gotten to the point where it's like we need to see more supplementation. I don't know if that's a word, but you need to supplement your pass game with a solid run game that's getting you at least 3 or 4 yards. And I know that they had a better go of running the ball later in the game. I think Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson both had a couple of key runs in that fourth quarter, but it's not consistent right now.
Ooh, I can hit you with the numbers there.
Go ahead.
Between the first and second half, there was an improvement, because in the first half, the Falcons had 9 carries for just 25 yards. That averages out to 2.8 yards per carry. In the second half, they had 20 carries. So you are already doubling the number of times they're carrying the ball for 81 yards. And so that cranks out to be 4.1 yards per carry. Not exactly double the production, but still it's nearing that mark where clearly they're doing better in the second half. But you also have to give the Commanders credit where credit is due, because they have Montez Sweat, Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, and Chase Young. Yeah. Those are all former first-round draft picks.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Yeah, no, and I think that's the whole point, too, is that this was the Falcons knew going in what this defensive front was and what it could do. And
massive.
I think I even wrote about it in my 5 Things to Watch that runs on Saturday. It's like a key question that I had going into this game was how this defensive front was going to play the Falcons, because you saw Justin Fields have a pretty dang good day last week against this defense. Even though he was sacked, I think 3 or 4 times, he still had, I think, 280 some odd passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and that they weren't really doing a lot on the run front, but they were able to pull out the win because they were able to score essentially. And
amazing how that works.
I know, right? It is quite the development. But I say all that to say that was something I was interested about, to see if the Commanders, especially after Desmond Ridder goes for 300 plus passing yards last week, okay, are the Commanders' box is it going to be lighter? Because they're going to be like, well, we got to respect both of them. But I don't know. I'm going to have to go back and look and see how many loaded boxes they played with.
Yeah, I think that'll be something to definitely take note of. And we've seen against a good Houston team that beat New Orleans in Week 6. Ultimately, they said Desmond Ridder beat us, and then Desmond Ridder beat them.
Yeah.
Right? He wasn't perfect, but he was very efficient with the ball, and we saw how good this offense looked, how good the playmakers looked when they were clicking. Desmond went over 300 yards again today, but obviously you just can't have those costly missteps, which brings us to topic number 3, which is Jesse Bates had an interception as the last play of the third quarter against the Detroit Lions. It's since been more than 3 games since the Falcons have taken the ball away. Mm-hmm. It's also been they've also turned it over 9 times since that Jesse Bates interception.
The number's gotten that high?
Yeah. So, and they're -6 turnover differential overall. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you look at some of the stats that we were talking about earlier, you think, oh, well, you know which statistical number that they lost. And this defense, for all the flowers they're getting, and it's deserved, Jesse Bates and Grady Jarrett, unprompted, both said, we need to get more takeaways. We need to get more takeaways. That's how this defense levels up. You're starting to see the pass rush get together. I think the secondary is pretty good. They talked about limiting explosives a little bit. They kind of do that over the course of games, but not taking the ball away is a big deal. And of those 9 turnovers since the Bates pick, in terms of the offense, Desmond Ridder is responsible for 7 of them. And look, he's the quarterback. He has the ball in his hands. When you get sack fumbled, sometimes you can't control that. Not everything is on the quarterback, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But I am saying that when you have 3 interceptions all in the second half, it does put you in a bind. And I think that recently the Falcons have been put in a bind. Now, Grady Jarrett looked at it with the glass as half full, being like, hey, we are competitive, and we almost won this game despite these facts, and look how good we can be if we get that cranked up. I think that's a good mindset for leadership to have, but they've got to start showing it. And, just like with the early first quarter issues, right, that Terrin has written about and we've all talked about, you wonder, is like, are we going to start pressing, trying to do too much? But that is a major issue, both against Washington. Why am I still talking? Against Washington and over the last couple of games.
I completely forgot about that highlight. The Falcons, for the first time this season, scored on an opening drive. Not only scored, they accomplished more than 3 plays.
Yeah.
Just saying.
And they look good. And
now I can stop tracking those.
Right. And we've talked about some of these Ridder interceptions, and, maybe it's one of those things where we got to really take a good look at it. To try to figure out exactly what went wrong. But I think overall, not getting too X's and O's about it is that they are ill-timed.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it eliminated 2 comeback attempts, and that's, ultimately the difference in this game.
Yeah, and I even go back to the game that they won. I mean, I know we're talking about – so we've been talking about the Detroit, the Jags, the Texans, and now –
the
Commanders game. So the Falcons are 3 of 4 in those games. No, sorry.
They've lost
3 of 4. I'm sorry. They've lost 3 of 4. So there is a trend here where they're not getting takeaways and they're turning the ball over. And I even in the one win that they had against the Texans, the fact that they were looking back on those fumbles that in those games, because they fumbled the ball twice in that game. And I even asked Arthur Smith in the middle of the week, this past week, like, how are you seeing guys take ownership of those turnovers to limit them? Because as we all know, if you win the turnover battle, if you win the turnover margin, it presents a pretty good opportunity for you to win the game. That's just statistically speaking. And, I want to see more from this team in terms of taking care of the ball, and also you talk about the defense leveling up, getting some hands on some balls, forcing some balls out. I mean, there's a lot that I think in terms of this conversation that needs to happen in order for the Falcons to get some type of jumpstart, kickstart in this conversation.
And I think part of it, for one, Jesse Bates is the only Falcons player to force a turnover to this point. He has all 4. But also, it's about generating pressure on the quarterback, whether it's a sack or not, forcing errant throws or doing things like that. And ultimately, that's how what I think is a pretty good defense gets better. I think this offense we've seen has some explosive capabilities and a willingness to be balanced. I think that's important if they can limit those mistakes. And ultimately, that's how you kind of manage through a game and get kind of hard-fought victories. And I bet you most of these wins and losses, as Terrin knows, that they're going to come down to the wire. Right. It's going to be difficult, and it's one mistake or the other that's going to turn the tide here. But let's end on the fact that the Falcons got 5 sacks. So, given the fact that this podcast is brought to you by Zaxby's, have we got some great news for you? Since the Falcons defense sacked the opposing quarterback, Sam Howell, at home 5 times no less, you can go to any Atlanta area Zaxby's for a buy one, get one Big Zax Snak meal the day after the game. So Monday, for those of you listening now, use the code ATLSAC23. And Calais Campbell
Go get 100.
He got 1 sack
Zaxby's.
today, but it's number 100.
Yeah.
That's a huge deal.
I really, really hope, and I tweeted this after the game, but I'll say it here. I really hope that this achievement doesn't get lost in the loss.
Right.
Because this is not something that happens every day. This is not something that many people have even been able to do in this league in the history of it, no less. So I really, really hope that this isn't overlooked, because this is quite the achievement, quite the feat. And I mean, he did the Dirty Bird after, so number 100 did the Dirty Bird.
That's tremendous. I mean, you look at it, this guy's on the all 2000s team, 6 Pro Bowls, a All-Pro year. I don't know. I think he could probably wear a gold jacket one day.
You think so?
Because of a combination of dominance and longevity for a dude who is 6'8", It says 282, but I don't know about that one, Calais.
Big dude.
Yeah, but to see him get it, I think is good. He was really close a couple times, and I don't know if it was a weight. I didn't have a chance to talk to him in the locker room, but I think that he's pretty excited to have gotten it. I know Grady Jarrett was not emotional, but he was so excited for Calais and to be on the field at that time.
Yeah. He was the first one to, after he did the Dirty Bird, he was the first one to hug him and I think give him a tap on the helmet. And I think, that means a lot to Grady Jarrett too, because as I remember writing, back before this season even started, when Calais was making the choice to come to the Falcons, like Grady Jarrett talked about how much that decision meant to him. Grady Jarrett, as someone who's been in Mercedes on this field in Atlanta his whole career, to have Calais Campbell choose the Falcons meant a lot to him. And so I think to be able to be on the field with him when, he gets his 100 sack meant a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, what an achievement. And you're right, and you do hope that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. So I think that's going to basically wrap it up, unless anybody else has anything for the good of the order.
Nope. No notes.
Yeah, so again, this was a negative result for the Falcons. Again, 24-16. They dropped to 500, but as Jesse Bates said, everything that we want is still in front of us.
Yeah.
And that's true.
It is true, but only but only if you show up and play at the caliber you can play at.
100%. And I think that is the moral of the story moving forward, is that they've overcome miscues. They've had some fourth quarter heroics, but sometimes the mistakes become overwhelming. Ultimately, though, please, just so you have that Falcons final whistle presented by Zaxby's dropped right onto your phone, you need to rate, review, and subscribe to the Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Or please, why don't you join the over 100,000 people that already subscribe to the Falcons YouTube page, where there's some just legitimately awesome content, because Austin Hiddle and Jenny Ross and the whole crew over there are pretty dang talented. Anyway, I'm Scott for Terrin and Tori. We are signing off. We will talk to you again next week. Bye.